I'm Derek. Welcome to Intertwined Hearts. Subscribe, like, and share if you enjoy. Let's go. The clanking of hospital trays echoed through the halls of Northwestern Memorial Hospital as Brooklyn Hayes organized medications for her final round of the night. Her delicate fingers, already calloused from years of dedication to nursing, moved with methodical precision between the bottles. At 28, she had built a solid reputation as one of the rehabilitation ward's most competent nurses, but nothing in her professional experience could have prepared her for what was about to happen. "Hayes, I need you in room 742, called Diana Robertson, the shift supervisor, her voice carrying an unusual urgency. "New patient arriving from the ICU, highly complex case." Brooklyn nodded, adjusting the stethoscope around his neck as he walked toward the elevator. The doors opened, revealing an entourage that looked like something out of a spy movie. Men in black suits, dark glasses, and serious expressions were escorting a stretcher where rested a man who, even lying down, emanated an imposing presence. Zain al-Rashid, 34, heir to the al-Rashid Industries empire, had been transferred to rehabilitation after 3 weeks in ICU. The helicopter crash that left him a paraplegic had been all over Chicago's newspapers, but nothing prepared Brooklyn for the impact of his amber-green eyes when they met hers for the first time. "Miss Hayes will be your charge nurse, Mr. Al-Rashid," Diana introduced, her professional voice masking the nervousness of having one of the most powerful men in Chicago as a patient. "Brooklyn," she introduced herself, extending her hand in an automatic gesture, only to be intercepted by one of the security guards. Zain, however, made a subtle gesture with his head, dismissing the interference. "Please call me Zain," he replied, his husky voice carrying a slight accent that Brooklyn couldn't precisely identify. "And I apologize for my staff's excessive hospitality." In the weeks that followed, Brooklyn discovered that behind the powerful businessman's facade was a complex man, struggling not only with physical limitations, but also with the weight of his family's expectations. During physiotherapy sessions, between exercises and conversations, an unexpected connection began to form. "You're different," Zain commented one night as Brooklyn adjusted his pillows. "Don't treat me as if I were made of crystal, nor as if my last name were adored of favors." "Well, to me, you're just another stubborn patient who refuses to do his breathing exercises," she replied with a playful smile, but her eyes betrayed the truth behind the casual comment. The al-Rashid family was quick to notice the growing closeness between the heir and his nurse. Amira al-Rashid, the family matriarch, began making more frequent visits, her shrewd eyes watching each interaction with calculated interest. Karim al-Rashid, Zain's father, maintained a vigilant distance, always accompanied by advisors who whispered in his ears, "My family has specific expectations about my future," Zain confided to Brooklyn during a particularly difficult night when pain was keeping him awake. "But for the first time in my life, I'm questioning whether those expectations even matter anymore." Romance blossomed like a rare flower in unlikely soil. Brooklyn found in Zain not just a patient or a powerful man, but someone who saw her for who she truly was. For Zain, Brooklyn represented a freedom he had never known, a chance to be loved for his vulnerabilities, not just his name or position. But as love grew between them, the wheels of a family conspiracy began to move behind the scenes. In secret meetings at the al-Rashid Industries office, documents were signed, plans were drawn up, and Brooklyn and Zain's fate was being sealed without them knowing. "The wedding will be in 6 months, Amira announced during a formal dinner at the al-Rashid mansion, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The family needs stability at this crucial time." Brooklyn, sitting next to Zain, felt her heart speed up. The engagement ring on her finger, a gift given the week before during an intimate moment in the hospital garden, suddenly felt like it weighed a ton. She didn't know that this dinner was just the first act of an elaborate drama, where her role had been written long before she arrived on the scene. In the Chicago skyline, the lights of the skyscrapers shone like earthly stars, silent witnesses to a true love about to be tested by lies, manipulation, and family secrets. Brooklyn Hayes, the nurse who won the heart of one of the most powerful men in the city, was about to discover that sometimes the biggest obstacle to love is not social differences or physical limitations, but the shadows that lurk in the hearts of those who claim to protect us. News of Zayn al-Rashid and Brooklyn Hayes' engagement spread through the halls of Northwestern Memorial Hospital like wildfire. Whispers and curious looks followed Brooklyn wherever she went, but she kept her head high, focused on her work with the same dedication as always. "So it's true?" asked Madison Chen, her colleague on duty, as they organized charts at the nurses' station. "Are you really going to marry Zayn al-Rashid?" Brooklyn hesitated for a moment, the sapphire and diamond ring weighing down her finger. "Yes, that's true. But nothing has changed, Madison. I'm still the same nurse I always was." However, the changes were already evident. Discreet security guards began appearing in the hospital hallways, and reporters crowded the main entrance, hoping for a glimpse of the nurse who had won the paraplegic billionaire's heart. At home, Brooklyn found a pile of correspondence other than the usual monthly bills, invitations to charity events, cards from renowned designers offering their services, and even a letter from the editor-in-chief of Vogue Chicago requesting an exclusive interview. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself, sinking into her worn couch, her cat Stanley jumping into her lap as if sensing her distress. The phone rang and Amira al-Rashid's name flashed on the screen. Brooklyn took a deep breath before answering. "Honey, I need you to come to the mansion tomorrow so we can discuss wedding preparations." Amira's voice sounded sweet, but had an underlying tone that Brooklyn couldn't decipher. "I hired the best wedding planner in Chicago. After all, this will be the social event of the year." The next day, Brooklyn found herself sitting in a room at the al-Rashid mansion, surrounded by fabric samples, floral catalogs, and a team of professionals talking about budgets that made her head spin. "The dress will be Vera Wang, naturally," declared Amira, leafing through a luxurious portfolio. "And the reception will have to be at the Peninsula, Chicago. Nothing less would be appropriate for an al-Rashid." Brooklyn felt his stomach drop. "Lady al-Rashid, I would appreciate being able to have some input in the decisions. After all, it is my wedding, too." The silence that followed was icy. Amira looked at her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Honey, you need to understand that by marrying Zayn, you are joining not just him, but the al-Rashid family. There are protocols to follow, expectations to meet." That night, when visiting Zayn in his room at the mansion, Brooklyn found him more thoughtful than usual. He had been transferred from the hospital a week ago, but had intensive physiotherapy sessions at home. "Is something wrong?" she asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I got an interesting call today," Zayn replied, his expression tense. "A former partner of my father mentioned some irregularities in the family business." Brooklyn felt a shiver run down his spine. "What kind of irregularities?" "I'm not sure yet. Since the accident, I have been away from the company's daily operations." He took your hand, his fingers tracing the outline of your engagement ring. "But I promise to find out. I don't want there to be any secrets between us." What Brooklyn didn't know was that at that very moment, in the main office of al-Rashid Industries, Karim al-Rashid was in a tense meeting with his lawyers. "The wedding needs to happen before the SEC investigations begin," said one of the lawyers, nervously adjusting his tie. "A union with someone as reputable as Miss Hayes could help lessen the public impact when the news breaks." Karim nodded, his face marked with concern. "What about Zayn's experimental surgery? Doctors in Switzerland have confirmed that the procedure has an 85% chance of success. But it's crucial that we keep this a secret for now. If the press finds out..." Meanwhile, Brooklyn continued her routine at the hospital, trying to maintain a balance between her professional life and wedding preparations. During one of her shifts, she found a mysterious envelope in her locker. "I thought you should see this," read the anonymous note that accompanied a series of complex financial documents. Brooklyn put the papers in her bag, determined to look through them later. Her instinct told her something important was about to be revealed, but she had no idea how much this discovery would change her life. The sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. On the rooftop of the Al-Rashid building, Zayn watched the city through his bedroom window. His thoughts divided between the love he felt for Brooklyn and the secrets that were beginning to emerge from the shadows of his family empire. In her modest apartment, Brooklyn lay on her bed, the mysterious envelope still unopened on her nightstand. The contrast between their simple world and the Al-Rashid's luxurious universe has never seemed so stark. But it wasn't the social difference that worried her. It was the growing feeling that there was much more at stake in this marriage than love. Stanley snuggled into his side, purring softly, while Brooklyn stared at the ceiling, his mind filled with unanswered questions. What would the documents reveal? Why did the Al-Rashid family seem so intent on rushing the wedding? And most importantly, how much could she trust the people who were about to become her family? Brooklyn stared at the documents spread out on his dining table, his long-forgotten coffee cooling beside him. The pages revealed a complex web of dubious financial transactions, all connected to Al-Rashid Industries. His heart was beating fast as he tried to process the implications of what he was reading. "It can't be," she muttered to herself, running her fingers over the numbers that seemed to dance before her eyes. Among the pages, he found mention of a private clinic in Switzerland and substantial payments for unspecified medical procedures. The sound of her cell phone startled her. It was Diana, his hospital supervisor. "Brooklyn, I need you to come to the hospital immediately. It's about your care records for Mr. Al-Rashid." Something about Diana's tone made her uneasy. Upon arriving at Northwestern Memorial, Brooklyn encountered not only her supervisor, but also two men in suits who introduced themselves as auditors for Al-Rashid Industries. "Miss Hayes, we would like to review some specific procedures performed during the time you cared for Mr. Al-Rashid," one of them said, his voice meticulously controlled. "All procedures are documented in the charts," Brooklyn replied, maintaining his professional composure as his instinct screamed that something was wrong. Meanwhile, at the Al-Rashid mansion, Zayn was in the middle of a heated argument with his mother. "Why did you hire auditors to investigate Brooklyn's medical records?" he demanded, his wheelchair positioned confrontationally in front of Amira's desk. "It's just standard procedure, darling. We need to make sure everything is properly documented before the wedding," Amira replied, her smile not reaching her calculating eyes. "Don't treat me like one of your executives, Mom. What's really going on?" Before Amira could respond, Kareem entered the office, his face full of concern. "The SEC is expanding the investigation," he announced, ignoring his son's presence. "We need the wedding to happen in the next 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Zayn protested. "That's absurd. Brooklyn and I agreed on 6 months. "It's not a suggestion, Zayn," Kareem stated with finality. "It's a necessity." Back at the hospital, Brooklyn found refuge in the nurse's break room, her world spinning with the day's revelations. Madison walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "The auditors are gone," she informed him, handing Brooklyn a cup. "But you won't believe what I heard when they were leaving." Brooklyn looked up expectantly. "They mentioned something about a clinic in Switzerland and an experimental procedure that could reverse—" Madison hesitated, lowering her voice. "Zayn's paraplegia." The words hit Brooklyn like a punch to the gut, connecting to the documents he had found earlier. That night, as he drove to the Al-Rashid mansion, Brooklyn struggled with a storm of emotions. When he arrived, he found Zayn in the conservatory, his eyes lost on the Chicago skyline. "We need to talk," she said, sitting down next to him. "About the wedding being brought forward?" Zayn asked, his voice thick with guilt. "About everything," Brooklyn replied, gathering her courage. "About the clinic in Switzerland, about the SEC investigations, about why your family is so desperate to rush this wedding." The silence that followed was deafening. Zayn closed his eyes, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I wanted to tell you about the surgery," he began. "But the doctors said the chances—" "It's not about the surgery, Zayn," Brooklyn interrupted, tears beginning to form in her eyes. It's about trust, about truth, about building a future together based on something real. Before Zane could respond, Amira appeared at the conservatory door. "Brooklyn, honey, I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss the last details of the wedding." "What details, Mrs. Al-Rashid? The ones involving using my marriage as a smokescreen for financial scandals?" The air in the room became thick with tension. Amira's expression momentarily hardened before being replaced by a calculated smile. "I don't know what you're talking about, honey. You're letting your imagination run wild." Brooklyn stood up, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "I found the documents. I know about the investigations, about the clinic in Switzerland, about everything." "Brooklyn, wait." Zane tried to reach her, but she was already moving away. "I need time to think," she declared, her voice breaking. "Time to decide if I can be part of a family built on lies." As Brooklyn drove back to her apartment through the bright streets of Chicago, tears blurred her vision. In the passenger seat, the documents that had changed everything seemed to weigh a ton. Stanley greeted her with a worried meow when she finally arrived home. Brooklyn sank into her couch, physically and emotionally exhausted. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from Zane, but she didn't have the strength to read them yet. The full moon bathed their small apartment in silvery light as Brooklyn considered his options. The love she felt for Zane was real, she had no doubt about that. But would it be enough to overcome the lies, manipulations, and secrets that seemed to surround the Al-Rashid family? The wedding preparations were progressing at a frenetic pace, transforming the Al-Rashid mansion into a true planning headquarters. Brooklyn watched everything with a mix of fascination and horror, feeling more and more like an actress in a play she hadn't rehearsed. "The invitations need to go out today," Amira insisted, her authoritative voice echoing through the living room. "And Brooklyn, honey, the last dress fitting will be in an hour." Brooklyn nodded mechanically, his thoughts still stuck on the documents he had discovered days ago. She hadn't told anyone about her discovery, not even Madison, who kept giving her worried looks during her shifts at the hospital. "Miss Hayes," called Hassan, Karim al-Rashid's personal assistant, interrupting her thoughts. "Mr. al-Rashid would like to see you in his office." Brooklyn's heart raced as she followed Hassan down the ornate hallways. She had never been called into Karim's office before. Upon entering, she found him sitting behind an imposing mahogany desk, his eyes fixed on a computer screen. "Sit down, please." He gestured to a chair. "We need to discuss some details of the prenup." "Prenup?" Brooklyn felt his throat go dry. Zane never mentioned it. "It's standard procedure in our family," Karim explained, sliding a document across the table. "Just some confidentiality and asset protection clauses." Brooklyn took the document with shaking hands, his eyes catching phrases like "pledge of perpetual silence" and "waiver of any rights in corporate information." It was more than a prenup. It was a legal gag. "I need time to look into this with a lawyer," she said, standing up. "Time is a luxury we don't have, Miss Hayes," Karim replied, his voice icy. "The document needs to be signed today." On the other side of the mansion, Zane was at his physical therapy session when his phone rang. It was Dr. Stefan Reinhardt from the Swiss clinic. "Mr. Al-Rashid, the results of the latest tests are promising," the doctor informed. "Surgery can be performed immediately after the wedding." Zane closed his eyes, the weight of guilt crushing his chest. He still hadn't told Brooklyn about the real possibility of walking again. How could he explain that he kept this secret for so long? Brooklyn fled Karim's office straight into the garden, needing air. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number with a link to an unpublished report on financial irregularities at Al-Rashid Industries. "Marriage is a smokescreen," the message said. "They're using you." Tears began to blur his vision when Amira appeared, elegant as ever in her Chanel suit. "Brooklyn, honey, you're late for your dress fitting," she said, but then noticed the tears. What there was? "Why didn't anyone tell me about Zane's surgery?" Brooklyn asked abruptly. "Why so much secrecy?" Amira's smile faltered for a moment. Sometimes we protect those we love by keeping certain truths hidden. Truths like the SEC investigations, like the fact that this marriage is just a PR strategy. The silence that followed was deafening. Amira approached, her heels echoing on the marble of the garden. "You're smarter than we knew," she said softly. "But you need to understand that there are bigger things at stake here. The family's reputation, the future of the company. What about love? Where does it fit into all of this?" "Love?" Amira laughed softly. "My dear, did you really think that a middle-class nurse could just join the Al-Rashid family without a greater purpose?" The words hit Brooklyn like a slap. At that moment, Zane appeared in the garden, his wheelchair silent on the floor. "Brooklyn," he called, noticing your troubled expression. "What is happening?" "Tell her, Zane," Amira challenged. "Tell her about the surgery, about how you knew from the beginning that you could walk again." Zane's face paled. "I was going to tell you. I was waiting for the right moment." "The right time?" Brooklyn laughed bitterly. "Like the time your family decided to use our marriage to cover up a financial scandal." "It's not like that." Zane tried to reach out to her, but Brooklyn backed away. "So what's it like? Because from here it looks like I'm just a convenient pawn in the Al-Rashid family's game." At that moment, Hassan reappeared in the garden. "Mr. Al-Rashid, there is an urgent situation at the office. The SEC is—" "He arrives!" Brooklyn shouted, surprising everyone, including herself. I can't do this." She ripped the engagement ring off her finger and placed it on the garden table, ignoring Zane's desperate call as she ran to her car. Driving through the streets of Chicago, Brooklyn could barely see through the tears. Your phone wouldn't stop ringing. Zane, Amira, even Kareem. She turned off the device and continued driving aimlessly, her mind a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. On the passenger seat, the folder with the incriminating documents weighed like lead. In 2 weeks, she was supposed to become Mrs. Al-Rashid. Now she didn't even know who Zane really was. The man she fell in love with, or just another player in her family's elaborate theater. The lights of Chicago glowed around her, oblivious to her broken heart, as night fell over the city that had witnessed the beginning and, possibly, the end of her fairy tale. Brooklyn spent the night in a small hotel in downtown Chicago, unable to face the loneliness of his apartment. In the early hours of the morning, her phone, which she finally turned back on, showed 47 missed calls and a flood of messages. Most were from Zane, but there were also messages from unknown numbers, some threatening, others offering money for his story. "Miss Hayes," the hotel receptionist called her room, "there are some reporters in the lobby asking for you." Brooklyn closed her eyes, exhausted. The news of her breakup with Zane Al-Rashid had already leaked to the press. She turned on the TV in her room, only to see her face plastered all over the local news channels. "Scandal in Chicago high society. Bride abandons heir Al-Rashid on the eve of the wedding." Her phone vibrated again. It was Madison. "Brooke, you need to see this," her friend said as soon as she answered. "I just received an anonymous email with documents about Al-Rashid Industries. They are trying to destroy all the evidence." "What evidence?" "The same ones you found. About the suspicious transactions, the clinic in Switzerland. But there's more. Much more." Brooklyn sat up in bed, her heart racing. "Madison, you need to find me. Now." 40 minutes later, the two friends were sitting in a discreet coffee shop in the Wicker Park neighborhood, far from the media spotlight. "Look at this." Madison slid her tablet across the table. "Emails between Kareem Al-Rashid and the Swiss clinic. They're not just planning Zane's surgery. They're using the experimental procedure as part of a larger scheme." Brooklyn read the emails, her stomach churning. The Al-Rashid family had invested millions in experimental medical technology, betting on a breakthrough that would multiply their empire. The marriage wasn't just a smokescreen for the financial scandal. It was part of an elaborate strategy to gain medical credibility through it. "Your reputation as a nurse." Madison hesitated. "They planned to use this to validate the procedure when it was released publicly." At that moment, Brooklyn's cell phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but something made her answer it. "Brooklyn?" The voice of Hassan, Kareem's assistant, sounded nervous. "I need to find you. There's something you need to know about Zayn." "Why should I trust you?" "Because Zayn doesn't know everything. He's as much a victim as you are." Brooklyn arranged to meet Hassan at a park near Lake Michigan. When he arrived, he found not only the assistant, but also Dr. Julia Chen, Zayn's personal physical therapist. "The family is lying to him too," Dr. Chen began, his hands shaking slightly. "Zayn thinks the surgery has an 85% chance of success. But the true numbers? They are much smaller," added Hassan, "and the risks are devastating." Brooklyn felt the world spin. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Zayn refuses to sign the authorization for the surgery," Hassan explained. "He says he won't do anything until he talks to you." Across town, at the Al-Rashid mansion, Zayn was facing his own battle. "You're throwing everything away!" Kareem screamed, his face red with anger. "Years of planning, billions in investments." "I don't care about the money," Zayn retorted, his wheelchair positioned defiantly in front of his father. "I love Brooklyn, and if that means choosing between her and this family—" "You have no choice," interrupted Amira, entering the room. "The contracts have already been signed. The surgery will take place in 3 days, with or without your authorization." "That's illegal," Zayn protested. "Not when you have medical power of attorney." Amira smiled coldly, showing a document. "Signed by yourself during your initial recovery." Brooklyn, still in the park with Hassan and Dr. Chen, felt his broken heart turn into something different. Determination. "I need to see Zayn," she declared. "But not at the mansion, on neutral ground." "The hospital," suggested Dr. Chen. "I can schedule a special physical therapy session for tomorrow morning." That night in his hotel room, Brooklyn composed a detailed email to his lawyer, attaching all the documents he had collected. His hand hovered over the send button, knowing that gesture could destroy the Al-Rashid empire, and possibly his last chance with Zayn. His phone rang one last time that night. It was Zayn. "Brooklyn," his voice sounded broken. "I swear I didn't know about any of that." "I know," she replied softly, tears streaming down her face. "But that doesn't make it any easier." "Meet me tomorrow," he requested. "Please. No family, no lawyers, just the two of us." Brooklyn looked out the hotel window at the city that had witnessed their entire love story unfold, and possibly fall apart. "At the hospital," she agreed. "At 7 in the morning." When he hung up the phone, Brooklyn finally pressed send on the email to his lawyer. Everyone's destiny was now in motion, like the lights of the cars that snaked down through the streets of Chicago, each going their own way in the darkness. Northwestern Memorial Hospital was waking up to another day when Brooklyn walked through its familiar doors at 6:45 a.m. The aseptic environment, once his second home, now felt strange and hostile. Discreet security guards occupied strategic positions, reminding her that nothing would be the same again. "Brooklyn!" Madison intercepted her in the physical therapy hallway. "The Al-Rashids are everywhere. Kareem arrived 10 minutes ago with a team of lawyers." "He shouldn't be here," Brooklyn mumbled, his stomach twisting. "The date was just between me and Zayn." "There's more." Madison lowered her voice, pulling Brooklyn into an empty room. "Dr. Chen was suspended this morning. Apparently someone found out that she leaked information about Zayn's treatment." Brooklyn felt the weight of guilt. His search for the truth was affecting innocent people. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. A message from Hassan. "Zayn is on his way, alone. I managed to convince Kareem to wait in the administration office." At 7:05, Brooklyn heard the familiar sound of Zayn's chair wheels in the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat when he walked into the physical therapy room, looking just as exhausted as she did. "You came," he said simply, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You lied to me," Brooklyn replied, keeping his distance. "About the surgery, about everything. Not about what matters." Zayn moved forward with the chair. "Not about us." "Is there an us?" Zane? Or am I just part of your family's elaborate plan? Do you really believe that? He asked, his voice breaking. After everything we've been through? Brooklyn approached the window, watching Chicago wake up. Your family is planning to perform experimental surgery on you without your true consent. How can I trust anything? That's why I needed to see you. Zane maneuvered his chair to be next to her. I found out about the medical power of attorney last night. They're going to force me to have the surgery, Brooklyn. Unless we get married and I use my position as your wife to stop it, Brooklyn added, finally understanding. That's why your family is so desperate for marriage. No, Zane protested. Yes, they want to use our marriage for various purposes, but He hesitated, taking a deep breath. I just want you. With or without surgery. With or without the Al-Rashid Empire. At this moment, the door opened abruptly. Karim al-Rashid entered, followed by 2 lawyers. Enough of this nonsense, he declared. Brooklyn, we have a proposition for you. Dad, no. Zane tried to intervene, but Karim ignored him. $5 million, Karim announced, for you to disappear quietly. No scandals, no leaks to the press. Brooklyn felt nauseous. Do you really think you can buy silence about what they're planning to do to your own son? $10 million, Karim increased the offer, his eyes cold. And assurance that your nursing career will remain intact. Get out. Zane's voice cut through the air like a blade. Now, father. You don't understand what's at stake here. Karim turned to his son. Years of research, investments. I completely understand. Zane interrupted. You are willing to risk my life for profit. Brooklyn watched the exchange between father and son, his mind working quickly. In his pocket, his phone weighed like lead, containing all the evidence needed to expose the truth. Mr. Al-Rashid, she finally spoke, her voice firm. I have a counter-proposal. All eyes turned to her. Cancel the surgery. Let Zane make his own medical decisions. In exchange, the documents I have about the company's financial activities will never come to light. Are you trying to blackmail me? Karim laughed humorlessly. No, Brooklyn replied. I'm trying to save your son, and maybe in the process save your family too. The silence that followed was deafening. Zane looked at Brooklyn with a mixture of admiration and concern, while Karim seemed to be having an internal battle. You don't understand who you're dealing with, girl, he finally said, his voice dangerously low. No, Dad, Zane interjected. You don't understand. Brooklyn is not someone you can buy or threaten. That's why I love her. Zane's words hung in the air, loaded with truth and emotion. Brooklyn felt tears forming in her eyes, but she held her ground. 24 hours, she declared, to cancel the surgery and give Zane back control over his medical decisions, or it all comes to a head. Karim al-Rashid adjusted his tie, his face a mask of suppressed fury. Without saying a word, he turned on his heel and left the room, his lawyers in pursuit. When the door closed, Brooklyn finally let her legs give out, sliding to the floor next to Zane's chair. You're amazing, he whispered, reaching for her hand, and possibly crazy for defying my father like that. Maybe, she replied, lacing her fingers through his, but I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy you. What do we do now? Brooklyn looked at their joined hands, thinking about everything that brought them here. Now we wait, and prepare ourselves for whatever your father's response may be. Outside, Chicago continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the drama unfolding within the hospital walls. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the physical therapy room, shadows that seemed to dance around the couple, as if rehearsing the movements of the next act of their story. The next 24 hours unfolded like a high-speed chess match. Brooklyn, exhausted after the hospital confrontation, found temporary refuge in Madison's apartment, knowing her own address was no longer safe. The tabloids are crazy, Madison commented, showing her tablet screen. There are already people speculating that you are a corporate spy hired by Al-Rashid's competitors. Brooklyn laughed humorlessly, absent-mindedly petting Stanley, who Madison had picked up from her apartment. If they only knew I was just a nurse who fell in love with the wrong patient. His phone vibrated. A message from Hassan. Emergency board meeting in progress. Kareem is furious, but some directors are on our side. Meanwhile, at Al Rashid Industries headquarters, Zain was facing his own battle. For the first time since the accident, he demanded to attend the board meeting, his wheelchair positioned at the head of the mahogany table where his father used to sit. The risks of surgery are unacceptable, he declared, his firm voice echoing through the meeting room. And the ethical implications of using my marriage as a front to manipulate the market are even worse. Your father built this empire, argued Richard Morrison, one of the oldest directors. Everything he did was to protect the family legacy. What legacy? Zain retorted. An empire built on lies and manipulation? Brooklyn was right. We need to do things the right way. In the next room, Amira al-Rashid watched the meeting broadcast on a monitor, her perfectly manicured nails drumming on the table. Beside him, a stack of documents detailed contingency plans for different scenarios. Ma'am, her assistant interrupted her thoughts. The private investigation team has located all documents that Ms. Hayes possesses. They can be neutralized today. Amira raised her hand, silencing the assistant. No, Brooklyn Hayes has proven herself to be smarter than that. I'm sure she has copies in places we can't reach. Back at Madison's apartment, Brooklyn received an unexpected visitor, Dr. Julia Chen, still wearing her hospital gown. I came straight from work, she explained, handing Brooklyn a folder. These are Zain's true medical reports, including all evaluations from the Swiss clinic. I thought you should see for yourself. Brooklyn looked through the documents, her heart sinking with each page. 15%, she murmured. The actual chance of success is only 15%. And a 70% chance of worsening his condition, added Dr. Chen. If something goes wrong, Zain could lose mobility in his arms as well. Brooklyn's phone rang. It was Zain. The council is divided, he informed her as soon as she answered. But I managed to convince some directors. They want to meet you. Meet me? Why? Because you have something they fear more than my father. The truth. The meeting was scheduled for that night at the Peninsula Chicago, in a private suite away from prying eyes. Brooklyn arrived escorted by Hassan, her heart pounding beneath Madison's borrowed blazer. The board of Al Rashid Industries was represented by 5 directors in addition to Zain. Kareem and Amira, notably, were absent. Miss Hayes, began Victoria Ashworth, a middle-aged headmistress with discerning eyes. We are here to negotiate. I'm not interested in money, Brooklyn declared immediately. We're not offering money, Victoria replied. We are offering change. Over the next 2 hours, Brooklyn heard a proposal that could change everything. The board was willing to restructure the company's leadership, removing Kareem from the presidency and canceling all agreements with the Swiss clinic. In exchange, the documents she possessed would never be made public. What about Zain? Brooklyn asked, her voice betraying her concern. I will be named interim president, Zain replied, reaching for her hand. With board supervision until I am completely recovered. My way, without experimental surgeries. There's one more thing, Victoria added, sliding a document across the table. We want you on the company's medical ethics committee. Your integrity is exactly what we need to rebuild our reputation. Brooklyn looked at Zain, seeing the same spark of hope in his eyes that he felt growing in his chest. But before he could respond, the suite doors opened violently. Kareem al-Rashid entered, his face red with fury. This is a riot. No, Dad, Zain replied calmly. That's corporate governance. What followed was a battle of wills that Brooklyn would never forget. Father and son, empire and integrity, power and love, all converging in that defining moment in a Chicago hotel suite. As night closed in on the city, decisions were made that would forever change the future of Al Rashid Industries, and everyone involved. Brooklyn stared out the window at the city lights, thinking about how his life had changed since that first meeting in room 742 at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. "Everything is fine?" Zane asked softly, moving his chair closer. "I'm thinking about how it started," she replied, "in all the choices that brought us here." "And did you regret any of them?" Brooklyn turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. "Just not trusting us sooner." The morning after the confrontation at Peninsula Chicago dawned with a light rain that covered the city like a veil. Brooklyn woke up on the couch in Madison's apartment, his aching back protesting the poor night's sleep. Stanley, his faithful feline companion, was curled up at his feet, oblivious to the unfolding drama. "You need to see this." Madison appeared with her tablet, her face tense. The Chicago Tribune headline jumped off the screen. "Al-Rashid Empire in Crisis. CEO Karim al-Rashid removed by board." Brooklyn sat up quickly, her heart racing. The previous night had ended in chaos after Karim's arrival, with security guards having to intervene when he tried to physically attack one of the directors. The board's vote, however, had been unanimous. Karim would be removed, and Zane would take over as interim president. His phone buzzed with a message from Victoria Ashworth. "Emergency meeting at 9 a.m. Your presence is essential." "I can't wear this to a corporate meeting," Brooklyn muttered, looking down at his wrinkled clothes from the day before. Madison smiled, opening her closet. "So I made some calls. Diana from the hospital lent some suits, and Dr. Chen brought shoes." At 8:45, Brooklyn entered the imposing Al-Rashid Industries building, wearing a navy blue suit that could have been custom-made. Hassan was waiting for her in the lobby. "The atmosphere is tense," he informed her as he led her to the executive elevator. "Amira has been at the office since 5 in the morning, and no one has seen Karim since last night." The 47th floor meeting room was packed when Brooklyn entered. Lawyers, directors, and executives occupied every available seat. Zane was positioned at the head of the table, his presence commanding the room despite his wheelchair. "Good morning, everyone." Victoria began the meeting. "We are here to finalize the leadership transition and implement the structural changes discussed yesterday." Brooklyn watched Amira, sitting silently in the corner, her expression unreadable. The Al-Rashid matriarch had lost much of her power in the last 24 hours, but Brooklyn knew it would be naive to underestimate her. "Before we go any further," Zane spoke, his voice clear and firm, "I would like to formally introduce Brooklyn Hayes. She will be the new director of the Medical Ethics Committee, responsible for overseeing all partnerships and investments in healthcare." A buzz ran through the room. Brooklyn felt dozens of appraising eyes on him, some curious, others hostile. "With all due respect," interjected an older executive, "but Miss Hayes has no corporate experience." "No," Brooklyn replied, surprising herself with her confidence. "But I have 15 years of practical experience in medical ethics and patient care. And most importantly, I have the courage to question decisions that put lives at risk for profit." Victoria smiled discreetly, while other directors exchanged approving glances. The meeting continued with discussions on restructuring, canceling dubious contracts, and new governance protocols. 2 hours later, when most of the participants had left, Amira approached Brooklyn. "You win," she said simply. "But allow me some advice. Keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. Not everyone who smiles at you today is your ally." Before Brooklyn could respond, Hassan burst into the room panting. "Karim is at Northwestern Memorial. He had a heart attack." The silence that followed was deafening. Zane paled, and even Amira looked momentarily shaken. "Go," Brooklyn said softly to Zane. "He's still your father." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Brooklyn accompanied Zane to the hospital, her experience as a nurse proving invaluable in navigating the medical bureaucracy and obtaining accurate information about Karim's condition. "It's a moderate heart attack," Dr. Morris, the chief cardiologist, explained. "He is stable but will need surgery in the next few days." In the ICU hallway, Brooklyn found Madison, who was on duty. "Reporters are everywhere," her friend whispered. "And you won't believe who just arrived, Dr. Reinhardt from the Swiss clinic." Brooklyn felt his blood run cold. The doctor responsible for the controversial experimental surgery that was almost forced on Zane was there, probably called Amira. I need to talk to him, Brooklyn decided. She found Dr. Reinhardt in the hospital cafeteria, looking out of place in his impeccable Italian suit. Miss Hayes, he greeted, his German accent pronounced. I imagine we have a lot to discuss. Why are you here? Because, contrary to what you might think, not all doctors are just driven by money. The procedure we developed can help people, as long as it's done for the right reasons, with the right patients. The conversation that followed changed a lot of what Brooklyn thought he knew about the situation. Dr. Reinhardt revealed that he had tried to warn Karim about the risks, but was ignored. The doctor had evidence that Al-Rashid Industries had manipulated data to make the procedure more attractive to investors. Back at the ICU, Brooklyn found Zane alone in Karim's room, watching his unconscious father. He always wanted the best for me, Zane said quietly. I just couldn't see that your best was destroying me. Brooklyn held his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. Here was a family torn apart by ambition and secrets, but also a chance for reconstruction and redemption. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first rays of sunlight were beginning to break through the clouds over Chicago. A new era was beginning for the Al-Rashids, and Brooklyn Hayes, the nurse who dared to challenge an empire, was at the center of it. The hospital hummed with a different energy that morning as Brooklyn walked through the familiar halls of Northwestern Memorial. Now, instead of the curious glances she used to receive as the bride of billionaire Al-Rashid, she noticed expressions of veiled respect, the nurse who dared to stand up to an empire on principle. Karim's latest test results are back, Dr. Morris reported, handing Brooklyn a folder. Heart surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. Brooklyn examined the documents with a clinical eye, years of nursing experience allowing her to understand the gravity of the situation. Karim would need triple bypass surgery. Zane needs to see this, she murmured, putting the scans away in her folder. In the ICU room, Amira was sitting next to her husband's bed, her posture impeccable even after days of practically living in the hospital. When he saw Brooklyn enter, something in his gaze changed. No longer the previous hostility, but something close to respectful resignation. How is he? Brooklyn asked, checking the monitors out of professional habit. Woke up briefly this morning, Amira replied, her voice tired. Asked for Zane. The silence that followed carried the weight of decades of unspoken expectations and shattered dreams. Brooklyn realized that, for the first time, he was seeing beyond matriarch Al-Rashid's facade. You know, Amira began, surprising Brooklyn, when I met Karim he was different. Idealistic, full of dreams of making a difference through the family business. What changed? The power, Amira sighed, and the fear of losing everything we've built. When Zane was born, that fear only increased. In the temporary office that had been assigned to Brooklyn at Al-Rashid Industries, stacks of documents awaited review. As the new director of the Medical Ethics Committee, she had the monumental task of auditing all of the company's medical partnerships. I found something interesting, Hassan said, coming in with more papers. Apparently, Dr. Reinhardt was not the only doctor consulted about the experimental procedure. There were others who refused to participate. Brooklyn frowned, examining the new documents. Why didn't these reports appear sooner? Because they were deliberately hidden, a familiar voice replied from the door. It was Victoria Ashworth, and I believe we found out who gave the order. The revelations that followed over the next few hours left Brooklyn stunned. It hadn't been Karim who orchestrated the manipulation of the medical data. It had been Richard Morrison, the same director who had tried to defend Karim's actions during the board meeting. He had a secret deal with Chinese investors, Victoria explained. If the procedure were approved, they would buy a majority stake in the company's medical division. Brooklyn felt his stomach drop. How many more layers of deception and betrayal were there in this story? Zane found her hours later, in the hospital garden where it all started. He had spent the morning in meetings with lawyers, preparing for the legal consequences of the findings. Morrison has been removed, he informed her, maneuvering his chair to sit next to her on the bench. And more directors could fall in the coming days. "How are you dealing with all this?" Brooklyn asked, noticing the deep, dark circles under his eyes. "Honestly, I'm exhausted, but also relieved. It's like we can finally breathe without the weight of all these secrets." Brooklyn intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the strength of this connection that had survived so many storms. "Dr. Reinhardt wants to talk to you," she said softly. "About treatment options. Legit this time, no pressure or manipulation." Zane nodded slowly. Maybe it's time to consider all the possibilities, but this time, I want you by my side in every decision." The moment was interrupted by Madison, running towards him urgently. "Kareem is awake," she announced, "and he's asking to see you two." In the CTI room, they found Kareem al-Rashid sitting on the bed, looking smaller and more fragile than Brooklyn had ever seen him. His eyes, however, maintained that characteristic intensity. "Leave us alone," he urged Amira, who hesitated before leaving the room. What followed was a conversation that would change the course of their lives. Kareem talked about regrets, about the weight of family expectations, about how the fear of failure had turned him into someone he barely recognized. "You were right," he told Brooklyn, his voice husky. "Especially everything. And Zane." He turned to his son. "You're stronger than I ever was. Wiser, too." Brooklyn watched father and son begin the delicate process of rebuilding, feeling that finally the walls that had kept so many secrets were beginning to crumble, leaving room for something new and truer to grow in its place. The week following Kareem's surgery brought profound changes for everyone involved. Brooklyn divided her time between her new responsibilities at Al-Rashid Industries and her visits to the hospital, where her experience as a nurse provided a unique insight into the family patriarch's recovery. "Heart values are improving," she explained to Zane, reviewing the latest scans as they shared a coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "The surgery was a success, but the recovery will be long." "Like ours," Zane replied, a small smile playing on his lips. Since the confrontation in the boardroom, they had been rebuilding their relationship on stronger foundations, without the secrets that once threatened to destroy them. At the Al-Rashid Industries office, Brooklyn faced its own challenges. The audit of medical partnerships revealed a disturbing pattern of questionable ethical decisions that went far beyond the case of the Swiss clinic. "We found 3 more similar projects," Hassan reported, depositing a stack of files on his desk. "All approved by Morrison in the last 2 years. And all involving the same Chinese investors," Victoria added, entering the room. "The FBI is interested in investigating possible industrial espionage." Brooklyn massaged his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility. Every decision he made now affected not only his life and Zane's, but also the future of thousands of employees and patients who depended on the company's medical products. "Dr. Reinhardt is waiting in the conference room," Madison called to let her know. Her friend had become a valuable ally, helping her navigate between the corporate and medical worlds. He brought the results of the new tests. In the conference room, Brooklyn met not only Dr. Reinhardt, but also a team of rehabilitation specialists. The Swiss doctor had fulfilled his promise to re-evaluate Zane's case with complete transparency. "There are options," Dr. Reinhardt explained, presenting a series of tests and studies. Not miracles, but proven treatments that can significantly improve Mr. Al-Rashid's quality of life. "No false promises this time?" Brooklyn asked, her professional tone masking the emotion in her voice. "Just real science and honest expectations," he assured. "And with her oversight as director of the ethics committee, each step will be documented and evaluated appropriately." In Kareem's room, Amira was organizing some belongings when Brooklyn arrived with the new reports. The relationship between the two women had evolved from antagonism to cautious mutual respect. "How's the committee?" Amira asked, surprising Brooklyn with her genuine interest. "Challenging," Brooklyn replied honestly, "but necessary. We are discovering that the culture of concealment went far beyond what we imagined." "You know," Amira began, sitting elegantly in the bedroom armchair. "When you came into Zane's life, I thought you would be our downfall. Now I see that you could be our salvation." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Zane, who had been having daily physiotherapy sessions at the hospital. His therapist was exploring new techniques that, although less dramatic than experimental surgery, were showing promising results. "I was able to move my toes today," he announced, a gleam of hope in his eyes that Brooklyn hadn't seen since the early days of their relationship. That night, Brooklyn finally returned to his apartment for the first time in weeks. Stanley greeted her with an indignant meow at her long absence despite Madison's daily care. As he was making tea, his phone rang. It was Diana, his old hospital supervisor. "We need you," she said without preamble. "Not as a nurse this time, but as director of the ethics committee. We have a situation with a new experimental treatment that is being proposed, and after everything that happened with the Al-Rashid." "Send me the documents," Brooklyn replied, realizing how his life had changed. Now she was in a position to prevent other families from going through what she and Zane went through. A familiar sound of wheels in the hallway made her smile. Zane had insisted on accompanying her on her first night back to the apartment. "I brought dinner," he announced, balancing a bag of Thai food on his lap. "And some news." As they shared pad Thai and stories from the day, Zane revealed that he had begun planning a complete restructuring of the company's governance. "I want to create an independent medical ethics board," he explained, his eyes shining with the same idealism that his mother had described in Kareem years ago. "With health professionals, researchers, and bioethics experts, without direct influence from the family or shareholders." Brooklyn felt her heart expand with pride and love. This was the man she had fallen in love with, not the heir to an empire, but someone who genuinely wanted to make a difference. "And there's one more thing," Zane continued, reaching his hand across the table. "Dr. Reinhardt and the team have identified a rehabilitation program in California. It's a long-term commitment, no miracle promises, but it's real," Brooklyn added, understanding the importance of the moment. "And this time, we'll do it together, the right way." Stanley jumped onto the table, knocking over a container of peanut sauce and making them both laugh. It was a simple domestic moment, but full of promises for the future, a future that they would build together on foundations of truth and trust. The cold Chicago wind bit through the air as Brooklyn oversaw the transfer of the latest medical equipment to the rehabilitation clinic in California. 3 weeks had passed since Zane's decision to try the new treatment program, and the logistics of the temporary move were proving to be as complex as the restructuring of Al-Rashid Industries. "The latest audit reports have arrived," Madison reported, handing over a folder as she helped organize the medical supplies. "Victoria asked you to review it before leaving for San Francisco." Brooklyn nodded, placing the documents in her bag. The ethics committee had become a transformative force within the company, with its recommendations being implemented across all divisions. The FBI investigation into Morrison and the Chinese investors continued, but Al-Rashid Industries was emerging stronger and more transparent from the process. "Miss Hayes," Dr. Chen appeared in the hospital hallway. "Zane is asking for you. We've just finished the last pre-travel assessment." In the physical therapy room, Brooklyn found Zane finishing his exercises, a thin layer of sweat on his forehead showing the effort. In recent weeks, small advances had fueled his determination. Movement in his toes, increased sensitivity in his legs. "How it was?" she asked, moving closer to help him with the final stretches. "Dr. Chen thinks I'm ready," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with that intensity that still made her heart race. "But there's something else we need to discuss." Brooklyn sat in the chair next to him, noticing a familiar tension in his shoulders that usually indicated important decisions to come. "Kareem wants to retire permanently," Zane revealed, "and the board voted unanimously to confirm me as effective CEO, not just interim." "That's significant," Brooklyn replied, processing the implications. "How do you feel about this?" "Honest, terrified, but also ready. And I want to do this the right way, with you by my side not only as director of the ethics committee, but as my partner in everything. Before Brooklyn could respond, Amira appeared in the doorway, her presence less intimidating than a few months ago but still commanding respect. "Arrangements in San Francisco are finalized," she announced. "The house is ready to welcome you, and I have found the best alternative medicine specialists in the area to complement the rehabilitation program." Brooklyn watched the transformation in Amira with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The matriarch had channeled her energy into supporting her son's recovery and the company's renewal, proving herself to be an unexpected but valuable ally. "What about the hospital?" Brooklyn asked, thinking about her patients and responsibilities. "Diana has agreed to coordinate an exchange program," Amira replied. "Nurses from Northwestern Memorial will do rotations at the San Francisco clinic, learning new rehabilitation techniques. It was your idea, actually." The ability to turn challenges into opportunities for growth was something Brooklyn had learned from the Al-Rashids, even through difficult circumstances. That night, in her apartment, Brooklyn was packing the last boxes when she found the ancient document that had changed everything. The evidence about the manipulation of the experimental surgery. It seemed like a lifetime since that discovery. "Thoughtful?" Zane asked, watching her from the doorway. He had insisted on helping with the move, even if it meant supervising more than physically helping. "Just realizing how much has changed," she replied, tucking the document away in a keepsake folder. "A few months ago, I was just a nurse trying to make a difference one patient at a time. And now you're changing an entire system," he added, his voice thick with pride, "but still maintaining that compassion that made me fall in love with you." The sound of claws scratching wood interrupted the moment. Stanley, clearly anxious about all the changes in his territory. "He'll adapt," Brooklyn laughed, picking up the cat. "We all go." "About that," Zane began, his tone changing to something more serious. "I know we're doing everything in the wrong order. First the almost marriage, then the scandal, now the move to California. Since when has our history followed any conventional order?" Brooklyn joked, but his heart quickened at the direction of the conversation. "True," he smiled, reaching for something in his pocket. "Which brings me to this." It wasn't a ring this time. They had already learned that outward symbols mattered less than true commitments. It was a key. "To our home in San Francisco," he explained, not as part of some elaborate plan or corporate strategy, just the two of us, building something new together. Brooklyn took the key, feeling the weight of the moment. It was more than a symbol of a new home. It was a promise of a future built on truth and mutual trust. "Stanley's going to need a scratching post with a view of the bay," she replied, making Zane laugh. The sun was beginning to set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Brooklyn of the first sunset they had shared in the hospital garden. Tomorrow they would embark on a new journey in California, leaving behind a city that had witnessed so much drama and transformation. But some things would remain constant: the love they had built through adversity, the determination to make a difference in the world, and the certainty that, together, they could face any challenge the future held. The California sun had a different quality than Chicago's, softer, more golden, as if it was welcoming Brooklyn and Zane to their new life in San Francisco. The house Amira had chosen for them in Pacific Heights offered a panoramic view of the bay, with the Golden Gate Bridge framed perfectly through the master bedroom's windows. "Stanley already found his favorite spot," Brooklyn commented, watching the cat lazily stretched out on a bench by the living room window. The move had been smoother than she expected, mainly because Amira had insisted on hiring a company that specialized in transporting pets with as much comfort as possible. "What about you? Did you find yours?" Zane asked, maneuvering his chair until he was next to her. 3 days had passed since his arrival, and tomorrow would be his first day in the rehabilitation program at California Pacific Medical Center. "I'm still processing everything," she admitted, checking her tablet where dozens of emails from the ethics committee awaited her attention. Victoria called earlier. The FBI's investigation into Morrison revealed connections to 3 other pharmaceutical companies. "Leave that for tomorrow," Zane suggested, taking your hand. Today is our last day before we start our new routine. How about we explore the neighborhood a little? The suggestion was tempting. Pacific Heights, with its elegant Victorian homes and tree-lined streets, looked like something out of a postcard. They had chosen the neighborhood not only for its beauty, but also for its proximity to the hospital and its wheelchair-friendly sidewalks. During the outing, Brooklyn noticed how Zane received fewer curious looks here than in Chicago. San Francisco, with its diversity and progressive spirit, offered a comforting anonymity. Here they weren't Heir al-Rashid and the nurse who exposed a corporate scandal. They were just a couple starting a new life. Dr. Patel called, Brooklyn mentioned as they stopped at a local cafe. She wants to integrate some Ayurvedic medicine techniques into her rehabilitation program, if you're interested. What do you think? Professionally speaking? The studies she submitted are promising, Brooklyn replied, her ethics committee director side coming through. And most importantly, she is completely transparent about the limitations and possible outcomes. Her phone vibrated. It was Madison, who had promised to keep Brooklyn updated on the happenings in Chicago. Kareem was discharged today, her friend informed her, and you won't believe it. He donated an entire wing of the hospital to medical ethics research. Diana is ecstatic. The news made Brooklyn smile. Kareem al-Rashid's transformation since his heart attack had surprised everyone. The man who once put profits above principle now seemed determined to leave a different legacy. Back at the house, they found Hassan waiting with a stack of documents that needed Zane's signature. As the effective CEO of Al-Rashid Industries, even from a distance, he still had to make important decisions. The board unanimously approved the new medical research transparency policy, Hassan reported, his face appearing on the laptop screen. And shareholders are surprisingly receptive to the changes, because they realized that ethics and profit are not mutually exclusive, Zane responded, digitally signing the documents. We just needed to find the right balance. That evening, as Brooklyn was organizing the medications and equipment that would be needed for the first day of treatment, he found his old Northwestern Memorial Hospital badge at the bottom of a box. Memories of those first days with Zane flooded her mind. The fear, the attraction, the discoveries. Thinking about the past? Zane asked, watching her from the bedroom door. Thinking about how sometimes we need to lose everything to find something better, she replied, putting the badge away in a drawer. If someone had told me a year ago that we would be here, rebuilding our lives in California, transforming Al-Rashid Industries, proving that love and integrity can coexist with business, all of it, Brooklyn smiled, moving closer to kiss him, and most importantly, doing it together without secrets or manipulations. An insistent meow interrupted the moment. Stanley demanded his dinner with the same authority that Amira used to command council meetings. Some things never change, Brooklyn laughed, going to feed the cat. Speaking of which, your mom called earlier. She and your dad are planning to visit us next month. To oversee my progress or your work on the committee, Zane joked, but there was affection in his voice. The relationship with his parents had evolved into something healthier since the events in Chicago. Both probably, Brooklyn replied, returning to him. But this time, there are no ulterior motives or hidden agendas. The sun was setting over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that made the water sparkle like diamonds. Brooklyn and Zane watched the spectacle from their balcony, Stanley nestled between them, all three of them adjusting to their new start on the West Coast. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the start of Zane's treatment, video conferences with the board, important decisions at the ethics committee. But for the first time since their lives intertwined in that Chicago hospital room, they would face these challenges with complete honesty and mutual trust, knowing that they had built something stronger than any corporate empire, a love based on truth and respect. 3 months have passed since moving to San Francisco, and California spring has brought with it more than just flowers. It's brought hope. Brooklyn watched Zane during his physical therapy session at California Pacific Medical Center, his heart overflowing with pride when he saw him manage to remain standing for a few seconds with the help of the parallel bars. Amazing progress, Mr. Al-Rashid, commented Dr. Patel, adjusting the lumbar support. The combination of traditional exercises with Ayurvedic techniques is showing results beyond expectations. Brooklyn took detailed notes on her tablet, not just as Zane's companion, but as director of the ethics committee. The success of this integrated program could open doors for other patients at Al-Rashid Industries. Victoria called earlier. She commented as she helped Zane back to his chair. The FBI has completed its investigation into Morrison. He has accepted a plea deal. What about Chinese investors? Interpol is involved now. Apparently, the scheme was bigger than we imagined. As they left the hospital, they were surprised by a familiar figure in the parking lot. Amira Al-Rashid, looking elegant as ever in her Chanel ensemble. Surprise, she smiled, hugging Brooklyn with an ease that would have seemed impossible a few months ago. Your father and I have decided to bring forward our visit. Where is Daddy? Zane asked, noticing Kareem's absence. In the San Francisco office, of course. Even though he's retired, he can't resist a business meeting. Back at the house in Pacific Heights, they found Kareem chatting animatedly with Hassan via video conference in the living room. Stanley, already completely adapted to Californian life, watched everything from his privileged position by the window. Northwestern's medical ethics program is being replicated at 3 other hospitals, Kareem reported as soon as he saw them. Diana is doing an exceptional job as coordinator. Brooklyn smiled, remembering how enthusiastically her former supervisor had embraced the project. What started as a response to a scandal was turning into a movement for real change in the medical industry. And the news gets better, Amira added, pouring tea into china cups that Brooklyn recognized from the mansion in Chicago. The World Council for Medical Ethics wants you to give a presentation at next month's Congress in Boston. Boston? Brooklyn felt his stomach flip. The idea of speaking about medical ethics to an international audience was simultaneously terrifying and exciting. You're ready, Zane assured, taking your hand. No one understands better than you how to balance medical progress with ethical integrity. That night, after Kareem and Amira retired to their hotel, Brooklyn found Zane on the balcony, taking in the city lights. San Francisco glowed differently than Chicago. Softer, more welcoming. Anything on your mind? She asked, sitting down next to him. I was thinking about how we got here, he replied, his eyes reflecting the lights of the bay. In all the choices, right and wrong, that have brought us to this moment. Regrets? Just not being honest from the beginning. But maybe we needed to go through all that to build what we have now. Brooklyn thought about how their lives had changed. The ethics committee was transforming not just Al-Rashid Industries, but the entire medical research sector. Zane's rehab program was showing promising results, without false promises or unethical shortcuts. Madison sent me photos of Northwestern's new medical ethics wing, she commented, showing her phone. I can't believe it all started with those documents I found. Sometimes the biggest changes start with small discoveries, Zane reflected, like a stubborn nurse who refused to ignore what was wrong. The notification sound interrupted the moment, an urgent email from the council. Al-Rashid Industries had been shortlisted for a Corporate Governance Innovation Award. All the more reason to celebrate, Zane smiled. But Brooklyn noticed a shadow pass over his face. What it was? Dr. Patel mentioned today that I may be close to taking my first steps without support, he revealed. But this time, I don't want to get my hopes up. I just want to appreciate every little bit of progress. Brooklyn felt tears forming in her eyes. That was the biggest difference between then and now. The honesty in admitting fears and limitations, the courage to face reality without losing hope. Stanley chose this moment to demand attention, jumping into Zane's lap with his usual lack of ceremony. The cat had become a kind of emotional thermometer for them, always appearing at the most necessary moments. I think he's trying to tell us it's time to sleep, Brooklyn chuckled, watching as the feline settled in comfortably. Or maybe he's reminding us that sometimes the most important thing is to simply be present in the moment, Zane replied, petting the cat thoughtfully. The bay breeze carried with it the scent of spring flowers, and Brooklyn thought about how the seasons in San Francisco seemed softer, gentler than in Chicago. It was as if the city itself was conspiring for its restart, offering an environment of healing and renewal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more physical therapy sessions, committee decisions, preparations for the Boston performance. But in that moment, watching the city lights with Zane and Stanley, Brooklyn felt a peace that transcended all the turmoil of the past. They had found their way not just to a new home, but to a new way of living, one based on truth, courage, and unconditional love. Brooklyn adjusted his blazer as he prepared to take the auditorium stage in Boston. 6 months had passed since her move to San Francisco, and now she was about to present the work of the Al-Rashid Industries Ethics Committee to an international audience of medical professionals. "You look beautiful," Zane whispered, bringing his wheelchair closer. He had insisted on being in the front row, even though he had undergone a particularly intense physical therapy session the previous morning. The auditorium was packed: medical executives, researchers, specialized journalists. Brooklyn recognized familiar faces. Diana and Madison had flown in from Chicago, Dr. Reinhardt had flown in from Switzerland, and even Dr. Chen, who had been completely rehabilitated into her position after the Morrison scandal. "Ladies and gentlemen," the presenter began, "it is with great pleasure that we welcome Brooklyn Hayes, Director of the Ethics Committee at Al-Rashid Industries, to discuss the revolution in ethical governance in the medical sector." As she walked to the lectern, Brooklyn remembered her first week as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. How much had changed since then, not just in her professional life, but in who she had become. "Our journey began with a disturbing discovery," she began, her voice firm. "But it has turned into an opportunity to redefine how companies in the medical sector can balance progress and ethics." From the front row, Zane watched her with obvious pride. That morning, he had managed to take 3 steps without support. Real progress, achieved through hard work and honesty, without shortcuts or empty promises. The presentation flowed naturally, with Brooklyn sharing not just data and statistics, but real stories of how the new ethics program was transforming lives. She talked about the integrated rehabilitation program in San Francisco, about the new ethics research wing at Northwestern, about the cultural changes at Al-Rashid Industries. "Questions?" she concluded after 40 minutes that seemed to fly by. "How do you maintain the independence of the ethics committee while being part of the Al-Rashid family?" a journalist asked. Brooklyn smiled, knowing this question was coming. "My relationship with Zain al-Rashid taught me something fundamental. True love doesn't require you to compromise your principles. In fact, it strengthens them." After the performance, during the reception, Madison pulled Brooklyn into a quiet corner. "I have news," she smiled, showing an email on her phone. "The program you implemented is being adapted to public hospitals across the country. Diana is coordinating the pilot in Chicago." "It's more than we dreamed of," Brooklyn responded, excited. "And there's more." Victoria approached, elegant in her Armani suit. "The board unanimously approved the expansion of the ethics committee into an independent foundation. You will have full autonomy." Brooklyn processed the information as he surveyed the room. Kareem and Amira were talking animatedly to a group of doctors. The couple had become staunch supporters of the company's new ethical direction. Hassan discreetly coordinated the logistics of the event, always efficient. Dr. Patel discussed the results of the integrated program with curious colleagues. "Brooklyn," Zane called softly, moving closer. "Can I steal you for a moment?" He led her to the hotel garden, where the Boston night glowed with city lights. The air had that unique quality of late spring in New England. "Do you remember the first time we talked in the hospital garden?" he asked, positioning his chair to face her. "How could I forget? That's when I realized you were more than just another stubborn patient. And that's when I realized you were more than just another dedicated nurse." He smiled, taking your hand. "You changed my life, Brooklyn. Not just by exposing the truth about surgery, but by showing me that there are more important things than power and money. You changed mine too, she replied, sitting down on a nearby bench. It showed me that sometimes it takes courage to fight for what's right. That's why I want to ask you a question, Zain continued, his voice shaking slightly. Not as the CEO of Al Rashid Industries, not as a recovering patient, but just as a man who loves you more than anything. Brooklyn felt his heart quicken as he reached for something in his pocket. Not a ring this time, but a small antique key. This is the key to the house where I grew up in Chicago, he explained. The place where I learned my first lessons about family and responsibility. I want to turn it into an ethical rehabilitation center, a place where people can find healing without compromising their values. And I want to do that with you. Not just as a committee director or business partner, but as my wife. The tears Brooklyn had been holding back all day finally escaped. This proposal was different from the first. There was no family pressure, no hidden agendas, just pure, true love. Yes, she replied simply, leaning in to kiss him. When they returned to reception, they were greeted by knowing smiles. Madison was already on the phone with Diana, planning the celebration in Chicago. Amira hugged Brooklyn with tears in her eyes, while Kareem shook his son's hand with obvious pride. To new beginnings, Victoria proposed a toast, raising her glass. And for full circles, Brooklyn added, looking at Zain. Later that night, in her hotel room, Brooklyn made a video call to her San Francisco apartment, where a neighbor was babysitting Stanley. The cat appeared on the screen, apparently indignant at his absence. "We'll be home soon, boy," she promised, feeling Zain approach her from behind. "Home," he repeated softly. "You know, after all this time, I finally understand what that really means." Brooklyn smiled, knowing exactly what he meant. Home was no longer just a place, it was the space they had created together, founded on truth, respect, and unconditional love. It was the legacy they were building, not just for themselves, but for everyone their lives touched.